totally about that. All right. Thank you for your time. All right, on to discussion item C, Human Rights Commission feedback.
Yeah, Mayor Pro Tem, Council, I'll give a brief introduction and throw it over to all HRC commissioners here. As a reminder, in the spring and summer, Council considered a ban on camping on property. This included a couple of work sessions, a first reading and a second reading. Ultimately, did not go through. Fast forward to September, October, Council said, they'd be willing to get additional feedback. HRC was able to provide a letter at the time of that process, but solicited more. What can you tell us from HRC? So this was shared back in October. If that's a segue, I'll throw it over to Julie.
Thank you, Clinton. Good evening, everyone. And I know it's a long night. I'm so thankful for all the things that you do and consider, and hopefully I'll try to just be very brief to say, there's already been some history here with this. We also really appreciate the fact that you reached out to Tim to ask the Human Rights Commission to provide some input and feedback on this idea. We took it really seriously, as you see from your packet here. And I'll just say that we basically, after we met, Courtney was involved in several other members of the commission. We felt like, one, that we still wanted to raise the question with you about, the necessity for this type of an ordinance that would prohibit camping on public property. And, we know that it would be for all people, but it will have a disparate impact on people who are unhoused, and that raises just human rights issues. And so we want to just again bring back the question of is this really needed? I mean, we know there were some high profile incidents that happened, and this occasionally happens, but is that really enough to warrant this kind of response? And then two, if the committee does want to keep going, or the council wishes to keep going down this road and explore this more, we really felt like it is important to think about involving setting up a temporary work group or task force or group of people who bring more expertise than we have as a group of volunteers on the Human Rights Commission for this issue. So folks who would represent people who work with people who are unhoused. And there's some great experts in the county. It could also include social workers, marketing, some other social service organizations, also law enforcement, city staff, public health staff, group, and people with lived experience, either working with or having relatives or themselves perhaps having experienced homelessness, to inform the development of whatever policy response that the city would ultimately decide. And so we thought that setting up that kind of a body would create a good mechanism or vehicle to work with, to get you more information, to help do the research, to also develop best practices, recommendations for these types of policies addressing this issue. And that also then, if this committee could also be charged with advising about whether an ordinance of this type is actually a good option, or if there will be other options to consider, and they can help with drafting it too, based on the research that they've done. And then finally, we also believe very strongly that it would be important that if this type of an ordinance were to be considered and adopted by the city, it would have to be accompanied by some strong supports for people who are unhoused, and also help programs and strategies to prevent homelessness too. So you can't just have the reaction that says that people who can't sleep or exercise their survival needs when they're unhoused, without having other supports and programs to help people who are in that situation. So that's what this embodies in the first two pages, and then knowing again that the council had already proceeded fairly far down the path of actually considering an ordinance. We put together then, based on the research that we were able to do, we put together the most comprehensive ordinance that we could do in the time that we had to work on this. And we looked at, again, examples from other jurisdictions. We looked at recommendations for good practices, especially emphasizing process and humane treatments, and making sure that anything be something to talk about and reflect upon. But this would be the kind of approach that we felt as a commission would be important to take. That's kind of.
Thank you. I'll just say this before you jump in. I just appreciate the level of a reflective practice that I think was in this as well too for us and offering us some feedback and think about this. I also do appreciate the amount of work I can only imagine it took to go through and look at other ordinances that exist that continue to make sure that people are people first and it's really intentional around humanizing individuals and not criminalizing, which I felt and like I said, the conversation piece around questions for us, and then the ordinance or the example ordinance to follow as well too. So I do appreciate that the detail and the work on that. So I think I'll open up to council. Any thoughts, ideas right away?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I have, first of all, I want to address the elephant in the room. Okay. So, Mr. O'Rourke here with his camera up, who I want the council to know and the people in this room to know that at no point should somebody try to shame you into seeing things their way. And that is exactly what's happening. And this is the author of the FBrad'sLaw.com thing, and that spans the city website, so just know that I will not be intimidated by any actions that are taking place right now. So, just so you know. Okay. Second, well, good, now we know. So, second thing is that I super appreciate the work that was done here too. I do see the Human Rights Commission as an advisory capacity, and I think it's the city's responsibility to come up with the ordinance, but I think there's some good things in here. I will share a story that not that long ago we had a homeless individual in Lakeview Terrace, and I came across this individual as they're in an RV. And we've probably seen it around town. It's the RV, and it's got artwork on the side of it, and they pulled the trailer. And so I walked up to him and I had a conversation. It was actually after the meet and greet, so I had my city shirt on. And I just said, hey, my name's Brad, I'm the mayor, just want to see what you guys are up to. And they're like, oh, we're not staying here overnight. And I said, well, you're actually not doing anything wrong. You're entitled to be here, but you're entitled to be here. I just want to hear your story. And the story was that the individual, his name was Connor, and his girlfriend Alana, he was in a motorcycle club, and he left the club, and they took everything he owned. And so all they had left was the RV, and they scrapped to get by. I said, I'm gonna mention a delicate thing here, but I just would like your perspective. And I said, we're thinking about passing an ordinance that would prevent camping in public property. So what do you think about that? And he's like, you need an ordinance. And I was like, okay, say more. And his girlfriend said, well, if you allow it, more could come. I said, okay, we need the ordinance. What makes it humane for you? And he said, give me a day. Just give us a day to move on. Like, we don't want to go to a shelter because they steal our stuff. But just give me a day. That's all right. That's good perspective from somebody who's living the experience. So your recommendation about getting input from people with lived experiences and MACV and experts, because we're no experts in the room, I'm just here to make sure that the city stays safe. That's our responsibility. I think that's a great idea. And I do think we need something in place that makes sure we lead with empathy, make sure that services are available and they've been offered, and then set a period of time that maybe they can't make that decision under duress. But the decision needs to be made. And so, because what we can't have happen, and played out in Minneapolis, is what happened in that parking lot where the guy said people can come here, and the encampment showed up, and it just became unruly. That's the unfortunate side of this. But I agree with leading with compassion and understanding, the audience that we're dealing with, but also respecting the residents that were here to serve and respect in their time. So that's my statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thoughts, ideas? Yes, Councilwoman.
Thank you, Julie, and the HRC for a lot of work and thought that has gone into this. And a couple of things that really resonated with me as I was reviewing these materials were the insights that you shared that the city doesn't have meaningful data right now showing that unhoused people camping in Robbinsdale constitutes a pervasive or frequent enough threat to necessitate this type of camping ordinance. And then additionally, what you had shared about how there's not enough evidence for housed people camping in parks or public property as a pattern of a problem that is requiring regulation at the moment. So rather than presuming the need for this, I am definitely in favor of understanding more data and more information. I also agree that if the data does show a need for this type of ordinance, I'm very supportive of a temporary committee, as mentioned, with lots of stakeholders, especially those that have lived experience of homelessness and those who work with unhoused people and those relevant organizations. All in all, I think the recommendations that you provided were very much in alignment with what I had shared for the justification for the last vote that came before council. And while I am very appreciative of the comprehensive draft ordinance that you've done, I actually feel more strongly about the process than I do pushing forward a comprehensive policy as detailed as it is. So at this point in time, I'm not yet in favor of approving a draft until there is a transparent process for gathering data to determine the need for this. And I think it's worth acknowledging that these are really complex and traumatic circumstances for individuals experiencing homelessness. So they're also the ones who are experiencing the consequences of this ordinance. So I want the process itself to be even more thoughtful and comprehensive than what we typically do for other city policies. So with that, I very much appreciate the work that the HRC does, and as an advisory committee to the council, I'm in agreement with the recommendations, particularly in the order. So again, the process is more important to me than the draft itself.
I have a question of staff. When we talked about this initially, the whole goal is really to give us flexibility to address situations where people are camping on public property in whatever capacity that's happening. One thing that I got asked that I didn't really feel like I knew a full answer to is that this would be a misdemeanor. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, so potentially, how it's written in the code could include that infraction. I think Yeah, that's the quick answer you're looking for.
Yeah,
There's
so,
more to it, but.
yeah, okay, so like in a similar way that we have certain overnight parking rules that most of Robbinsdale parks on the street, a lot of people do. So we use it as a backstop in a scenario where something is out of control, and for whatever reason, that's when we utilize it. But it's almost never. I mean, is parking overnight? That's a ticket, or what is that?
Parking overnight would be a ticket, yeah.
But am I understanding the way it gets implemented correctly? Or is that am I missing something?
Correct me if I'm wrong, where I'm going with this, but understanding your question is what we proposed by way of ordinance was it gave us a way to address the situation that we didn't have before. I think there were arguments that if you're concerned about unhoused conducting illegal activity, address it through that mechanism. So if we're talking about an individual or up to an encampment, if we're talking about sexual assault or drug use, that go through that lens, and that was not our preference. But you're talking about the flexibility, and so the way we proposed it said, listen, that here's an opportunity, and we talk about leading with compassion and sharing resources, whether through our social worker or other organizations that we partner with, including the Henry County's got a large wing that provides these opportunities, utilizing that as a road to address, and ultimately saying, listen, we tried all these things, you're not able to stay here. That was the intent.
Mm-hmm.
So much like with, you talk about parking overnight, I look out the window and I think about snowing, we have an ordinance. The ordinance says that when there's 2 inches of snow, until it's plowed from curb to curb, there's a snow emergency, and during a snow emergency, you can be ticketed or towed. We do our best in a sequence of, at first, tagging by way of here's an informational thing, we communicate, until we're blue in the face, then we start with ticketing, and then we start with towing. It's not the goal to be harsh and treat any situation through code in that mechanism. It's to give us the opportunity to, like you say, to have something to say, well, we tried all these things, there's a violation here. No intent of coming out and issuing a ticket, the opportunity to move on before that happens.
Thank you. So I guess just, as a perspective on this, I understand that there's the perception or maybe even the reality that this will impact unhoused individuals. But I think it's also, I guess from my perspective, I think it's incorrect to say that an incident caused us to create this. I mean, or at least an incident that happened in Robbinsdale. I think it had more to do with the fact that there was some question as to whether or not this could be in place at all that went to the Supreme Court. And once that decision was made, sort of opened the door to us having some confidence as a city that this is something we could essentially put into place. Now, there's also the fact of the matter is that our city, our public property, the parks, whatever, they're not designed to be camped on by anyone. So I don't know that it's a real stretch to say we should have something in place that explicitly states that, because that's not how these parks are designed to be used. And again, if the result is that it is impacting more unsheltered people or unhoused people or people having mental health episodes, I feel like along the entire way, I know that it is really important to me to lead with compassion, to have empathy, to understand the position that they're in, and that there are a lot of scenarios that need flexibility, but that as a city, our parks, our public spaces aren't designed to be camped in whatever capacity. So I know there's a ton of focus, this whole thing is about homelessness, and I get that that's a response to what the outcomes might be, but I think from a policy perspective, I want to do what makes sense for the city. And while I appreciate there's so much work that went into this, and I really appreciate and it's so thoughtful, and it really is thinking about a community that might have, that if we put this in place, could have an outsized impact to them. I really do appreciate that. But the goal is not to punish anyone for being homeless or to punish someone for having a mental health episode. We're trying to put things in place so that there's just, it just gives us sort of a consistent lay of land that is in line with the way these spaces are to be used. Now, if we were saying, listen, we have these parks that people camp overnight all the time in, but we don't want homeless people that camp overnight in them, then that's totally different. Then I would be 100% on board with, like, we can't even do that. We shouldn't do that. But I feel like we're, at least from my perspective, and I'm not saying I'm right, this is just my opinion, but I do think that, like, again, our city, our public spaces, they're not designed to be camped in. And they're not designed for overnight camping in whatever capacity. And so, yes, I think there are some things, are there things we can do to make sure that, you know, we show we're thinking about. I mean, I don't know, I feel like the whole time we went through this, the last pass, all of my questions were about, like, are we harming people? Are we, you know, it's like, there was talk about, like, the language being vague. And, like, I just, that to me was sort of concerning. So asked a ton of questions about that. And it was assured that it was like, okay, if we put a rule in that it's 24 hours, or whatever it is, some hour limit, that we could run into a situation where we're making progress with someone, and now we've got in our ordinance this hard stop that, like, we didn't really give ourselves flexibility, and we didn't, I don't know, I just feel like it made sense, and I am leading with empathy, that, like, this is under the assumption that this is all just targeting people, and that, like, they have to be protected, when I think the goal is the flip of that, which is to, like, set a baseline for Robbinsdale and treat people with respect and compassion and empathy. So if there needs to be more language to make people feel more confident about that, I'm okay with it, but at the same time, it's like, we ask questions about, like, compassionate engagement, or whatever you want to call it. Like, those are subjective terms, and so we set ourselves up for issues in the long run of, like, well, you know, the way that police officer talked to me wasn't compassionate. Well, like, depending on who. And so I really, like I said, I appreciate the work that went into this, and I appreciate that it is, like, really thinking about a community that doesn't have a voice. But I feel like I am thinking about that. But I'm also thinking about Robbinsdale and how these spaces are designed to be used. So now I'm talking in circles. I think I'll leave it at that. But I mean, again, I'm open to being convinced otherwise, but that's how I feel about this.
Thank you, Councilor Wagner, how you feeling?
Yeah, conflicted, I guess, but I appreciate the discussion. Yeah, thank you to the HRC for getting this together, and I like a lot of the ordinance that you put together. I think some of it is probably a little like, it's just, there's a lot there, and so I worry with the city of our size, with the staff resources that we have, the ability to implement the full scope of the ordinance as it's right now. I'm worried about, but I like the intent of it. There, like I said, there are parts that are good. I think where I'm at, though, right now is kind of in the same vein as Councilor Parisian. You know, I've heard from us a number of times. I've heard of all of our opinions, and including the police departments. And then we had a number of community advocates come out, but I don't think unless I missed it, I'd love to be reminded of it, but I haven't heard from, like, faith leaders or treatment facilities. I haven't heard from the county about their approach to all of this stuff, and I haven't heard from shelters and kind of their perspective on things. And so I think if I remember what Councilmember Parisian was saying, that's kind of like the crux of where things are at with her, and like getting kind of like more information, more community groups involved. And I can't really speak to the role of city property and how it should be used or not used, because I tend not to put a lot of emphasis on that, but I do understand like where others are coming from. I think the lens that I just am stuck on, that I can't help but see this through is, as a person in recovery, you go through the 12 steps. The 12th step is, using your insights of sobriety to go out into the community and talk to other alcoholics. And I worry when we're shuffling people along, you miss that opportunity to do the 12th step with them. So that's kind of where I'm kind of just stuck on it. Maybe that's a failing, but I think the ordinance, though, some of those parts, right, like at the beginning, talks about 7 days. I thought that's a nice addition. I don't think we really had the time scale aspects to that. I don't know if I think I would prefer if there was going to be an ordinance on the books in Robbinsdale, I would like something like a timeline, and so I was glad to see that called out specifically. I also like all the data and the intention behind, like, this is what our policy recommendation is, and this is the huge list of why that's recommended. And I think that's, I would love to see that in any kind of future ordinance as well, because talking about kind of the vagueness of the last one, that was the biggest weakness of it, I think, in my opinion, was just that you could really look at it and not understand, or at least I didn't understand why it was needed, what was backing the decisions around the action that we're, and plan that we're proposing. Because, and this is a little aside, but it was brought up about like overnight parking. Like, I think we should get rid of that rule if we're not going to enforce it. And in a similar vein, it's like, if we're going to have a rule in place, but make all these exceptions, and it's really vague and not clear when things are going to get enforced and when they're not going to get enforced, I think that's a weakness of it, and I think that's a disservice to residents and anybody trying to follow the rules. If they are following the rules and they see like, oh, this is being prohibited but nothing's being done, it's weird. And like when people get tickets on this for overnight parking now, it's like, why was that enforced one day but not another? So I really would like us to move away from that. That's just my opinion. And so anyway, that was an aside. But so yeah, I think I like the direction it's headed, though. I think this is I think we're in a better spot than we were 6 months ago. So that's really where.
Thank you for your feedback and thoughts as well. I think I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the perspectives and what's been offered as well too. I think part of why I was hesitant the last time I said that, like I said, I came in very intentional when we showed to go. You said it was very big, and that's what I heard from other people. I do think the proposed draft ordinance does go into some depth around like humanizing, making sure that we're doing our due diligence as well too as a community. But also want to respect the fact that I think it is important for us as a council because this is and understand what that means for us. And so in that vein, I think Councilor Parisian, I'm going to ask this as well too. Is there a place where if we were able to get a few people, I think, I've also got a chance to know some neighbors who reached out and called me to have some conversation, especially after the vote, to see kind of the reason why. And I kind of explained to them what that, my last was, I think it wasn't too vague. A lot of people that I spoke with wanted to have an ordinance that didn't, like I said, didn't marginalize and or criminalize people as well too. And they said, well, we don't want that. We want something. We don't want that. And so for me, it was like, that makes sense for us to have some neighborhood orders, some things that we have some recommendations in some places to follow as well too. And you don't have to count. I have 4 colleagues that I've worked with who do it. would love to bring it on. If that was something that we for our community, like us, to have a deep conversation. But I will say, I do like where this is headed. And I think based on what they told me and they talked about, there needs to be something in place just to help support the process sometimes. Because I think that's where I'm coming from again is listening to some experts outside of the and it's I think that's really important as well too. But also knowing that yours reached out and we're curious about that and want to have a very thorough and very thought out plans for camping for this Robbinsdale and whatever. And I think there's one question I asked you. Also, are churches excluded from the ordinances that we have in place? And okay, that's why I said I don't think so. I'll double check that question for you to see how that works.
It may not seem like it. That's a fairly complicated.
Yeah, I thought it was.
If you think about land use rules specific to code, they have certain designations and certain protections. There are, and maybe what you're referring to, there are some communities that have adopted like accessory dwelling units on church property as a way to, help look at the situation we're describing right now. So not something that we currently have, but it really depends on the circumstance.
Yeah, I'll be more right. I don't think it was about can property wise. Yeah, it is right. Yeah.
Yeah, so it would be treated as it's defined per zoning, and yeah, certain code violations would apply.
Okay. I'll get back to that question that came with that. Okay, so I'll double check. So thank you. So with that being stated, like I said, I think once again, I appreciate the amount of work that is this draft ordinance because that's in that same vein. And then I think to have some level of expertise and knowledge in space as well as move this forward in a way that is intentional and doesn't have some of the questions, answer some of the questions that I want to. I would be open to saying, hey, and some individual to me at this level. I think to be honest, a lot of what I would want to see is in here, but I do think to have some expertise and do some real experience.
To avoid future complications, do you need us to give you a direction on what we want to see? So we're just not glossing over this. Tim goes and does his homework, comes back and like, I was kind of looking for it. Right? I think we looked at Tim. He gave us the best ones and we took that to his lab. So,
I think if I may, what I would think you may want direction on is if you're looking to have subject matter experts attend the work session, or are you looking to impart on what HRC's recommendation was, put together this committee that makes a set of recommendations, and then some part of that group comes to a work session in the future. Not that it's binary, but in those two paths, there might be some areas. That would be good direction to get, so I appreciate that. And if there are specific items, simultaneously, what I would remind you, if there's things that you're seeking out, certainly we can make people available, nonprofits, other jurisdictional authorities, and whatever it may be, if there are folks within this world that, provide these resources, if we can get you in touch with them one-on-one, we're happy to do so. So, direction on where do you want me to go?
Yeah. I'll say this, and then let me know if that makes sense later on. Because I appreciate the clarity on that. I think that it would be nice to have a group of individuals come and look at what we currently have in place and to provide some back or some knowledge around. I think we have from this draft form, and then
so I think, again, I appreciate the hard work that went into this draft, but I think this is a city administrative responsibility is to draft the ordinance. Right? I
that gives the council tangible information on the justification for the need for the ordinance. And I'm not here to take a position on whether at this time that information will be valuable and whether that is through support from a committee that we're talking about. But I do very much agree with the order and operations in which the HRC is making the recommendation. So,
If I can, one of the things we struggled with, if you recall last summer, when asking for data to quantify, like we've been discussing, the conversation was very focused on the unhoused population. Being unhoused is not a crime, right? So we don't have data on like capturing circumstances in which, you know, they have received a citation for something else, well, being unhoused, that they're not always necessarily connected. I think again, it's a sort of some of the instances that were shared publicly were anecdotal. They got a lot of attention. It's hard for us to, unless we have very, I shouldn't say very explicit, but more explicit direction on what is that would be helpful to know. Not that we're looking to hit a threshold or make sure that we quantify, justify, and, you know, fix the numbers and then again find out that that's not what we're looking for. But because being unhoused is a crime, it's not something that we quantify. So there are good stats that you see right here, but again, call it a snapshot. I get, you know, terrified with the federal funding that's being cut, right? It's, I think it's fair to speculate that population may grow. So now is time as ever to invest resources with these organizations, with the county, to make sure that resources are available that have maybe gone away from these other nonprofits or otherwise. So there's a set of data that's here now, and that's going to change. But for specific things that we can either as a committee or provide, letting us know. This may be a one-on-one conversation too.
sure. Yeah, I definitely be open to that. I think my point is that the information that the council has right now for that justification is pretty limited. So if there are more anecdotal types of data from, you know, public safety or organizations that we've discussed in terms of the committee of stakeholders, I think it's fair to ask for this type of information so that when the council is asked to essentially justify an ordinance that does bring up a lot of emotions in the community. So I think we should be well equipped to be able to speak. So that's the reason why I think the order of operations and these recommendations I'm in alignment with.
Yes, thank you. When we went through this process last summer, we got a lot of feedback from residents. And I talked to a lot about feedback on we do not support a homeless ban. We don't want to continue, we don't want there to be a homeless ban in Robbinsdale. So I was having conversations with, and again, you know, it was just like a clarification of, hey, this is an ordinance about overnight camping. There isn't a homeless ban. And why people thought that is, I don't know. I mean, if the language was not clear, I think there were also some people that were posting on social media talking about a homeless ban, and that wasn't accurate either. So the thing, I guess, that jumps out at me is that, like, upon having those conversations with people who were definitely very concerned about a homeless ban and homeless people in that community, when I explained to them what it was, and I mean, similar to the conversation here, it's like, you know, this isn't targeting, it's not a crime to be homeless. I haven't heard any feedback about this. Like, I talked to those people, they felt, I don't know if it was reassured or whatever. They didn't have any more complaints. They didn't show up at meetings to say like, we can't do this. Like, I haven't heard from the community that this is a problem to have a camping ordinance. So I think that's important because that is like real feedback. I mean, it was probably like 5 to 6 people that I either talked to on the phone or emailed with. And after having a conversation with them, like, I didn't hear from them again, which to me, if it was like really an issue with a camping ordinance and they felt like this is wrong, I feel like I would have continued to hear from them. I mean, this is so the other thing that I guess I'm gonna go back to is that like our public spaces aren't designed for, so I like the need for an ordinance. I just think there's a lot of things in place that maybe don't come up that often, but like if you felt like the use of our parks or our public spaces was for overnight camping, then I could see where you have like a big problem with this ordinance. Like, it doesn't make any sense because these spaces are designed to have overnight camping, and we should have overnight camping. And if you feel that, then then that argument to me makes perfect sense. But to me, and I haven't heard anyone make this argument, like, these spaces are not designed. Our public spaces aren't for overnight camping, and so again, like, they're just like, given the legal frameworks that we're in, and that, like, there was a Supreme Court decision, like, this makes sense as a backstop for our city. I don't envision that it's going to be. I don't know. I think it makes sense because again, these spaces aren't designed for overnight camping, and that's what this ordinance is about.
Alright, so I'll say what Dan said.
I got one more thing to say.
Okay.
So this has been a widely publicized event, and our friend here from Crystal is done his job of making sure that the community is aware of it. I have not received any opposition in my talks, despite all of these events, to bring awareness to it. I have not received any opposition to this ordinance. Now, I'm with Jason that we still can't have camping in our public spaces. And I'm also with the recommendation of the HRC to say, well, let's get a panel of experts together then, but to pretend that, this doesn't exist or it's not a problem here, it's just, what happens if it does? And I'm going to go back to the example from this past spring where that woman put her tent up and then lit a fire, which caused her to be vacated from that spot. She then went to Hennepin County Rail Authority property, and then somebody else put a tent up next to her. She didn't feel safe, she didn't like that. But there's nothing that can be done about that, because there's no rule against it. So, that's just a small example of a situation where someone who literally was unhoused didn't feel safe because someone else unhoused decided they wanted to put their tent right next to hers. There's no rules on that. So it's something like this is a kind of thing that gets put in place, and it's not criminalizing people, it's not putting them in jail. It's just simply saying, I'm going to introduce you to somebody who has the capacity to help you with resources. You have the option to take these resources. If you don't want to take these resources, staying here for an extended period of time is not an option. But we're not going to throw you in jail and say no. We're just going to say it's safe. That's the way I envision that. So,
Thank you.
and also, as far as collecting data on this, like Tim's right. Like, it's not like, how are we going to collect data if there's no way to collect the data? It's not like the department's going to come out with a survey. So maybe I'm missing the point. I defer to that. Thank you.
Anybody else thoughts? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I first I want to say that, of course, we understand we're an advisory committee. We know we're just passing on recommendations, making advice. Of course, you will approve or write the law. So, but we did our best to put together something just to be clear. Like, and I think it's great that you're having this discussion, this debate. I mean, this is what it's all about, right? And I hope that you will view us as a resource to ask questions. So, like this research question, the data question, like, I believe it would be could be very helpful to talk to Hennepin County. They collect this kind of data all the time. They might be able to help you collect data here. They might have a graduate student who needs a project to do, who could come out here and do a survey or do some work and collect that information for you. So, like, I think there are ways that you could get this data. Maybe you also can connect with some of the folks who do this work a lot and can help you with that. So, so I would encourage. I'm encouraged that you're thinking about reaching out to these folks. Like MACV, we have MACV here in our city, right? They have a housing unit here, and they are always collecting data or doing work in this field. So I think that would be a great resource to tap to on an issue like this. And I think it's just important to know too, I think the point that you're not hearing from people, it could maybe because they know it didn't pass. There's nothing to, the ordinance that you guys were talking about before, you didn't adopt it. And that's public knowledge. And so why would people call you about something that they know didn't pass? I just want to raise this, alternative perspective about interpreting silence doesn't necessarily mean it's agreement or acquiescence or whatever. I think you have to be careful about that. And I can't help but draw a connection to the earlier conversation about the park renaming and following recommendations from Dakota representatives, which I think I'm so grateful for our Parks and Rec people for kind of digging into that and coming back with that recommendation. It's so thoughtful and meaningful. And I just want to point out though too, I just learned yesterday about a study that came out from Wilder. They have 2 reports in September about homelessness for American Indians in the state. One focused on homelessness in tribal nations and one focused on homelessness outside of tribal nations. And there were some very distressing statistics there. And I think if you're thinking about what is the city's commitment to sort of recognizing the history and the both the good and the bad, the traumatic and the positive with the tribal nations here that we share land with. There's Native American or American Indian people are disproportionately represented in the homeless population. And this report found that nearly half of the American Indians who experience homelessness outside of a reservation are in Hennepin County. So, and probably a lot of that's in Minneapolis, but I don't know for sure, and we're not that far away from Minneapolis. So you have to think that we see some of that representation here. And the median income for an American Indian who's homeless in Hennepin County is $203 a month. The average 1-bedroom apartment rents here for over $1,000. So you can see kind of the huge disparity there. So I think that again, this is just one small example of how this is such a complicated issue. There is so much that goes into being unhoused and being homeless that I really encourage you when you're thinking about an ordinance like this, which maybe seems like just a tool to solve a problem, be a backstop, but this isn't just overnight parking. This is talking about a basic, fundamental survival need for somebody. Where to sleep. But I also want to say then on the fact about the lack of criminalization, when I look at the city code here, you have to be very intentional that you're not creating a crime. It's not, because before the previous ordinance did left it open. It could be a misdemeanor. It could be treated like a misdemeanor. You get a ticket, and then it becomes a fine and becomes jail penalties too. So if you don't want to have that option, that path, you have to be very deliberate and clear about it in the language. And so that's part of, for me as a constituent, the vagueness concern is there. Because if you don't say it, then it's open. And the Supreme Court case that you're talking about really just opened the door for communities to have laws that criminalize homelessness. Before, that was considered not constitutional, a violation of the 8th Amendment. So now it is possible to criminalize homelessness. So that's what the Supreme Court decision did.
Sure. Can I just really quickly,
Well, hold on, next question.
Oh, go ahead.
Is this, because part of this conversation, I want to provide direction
Yeah.
to the city, and I want to provide direction to this team. And I think that's the most necessary. I think we can talk. I think we talk all night long.
Yeah.
We really could.
So I guess the one thing that I do want to say is,
Yeah.
as a council,
Yeah.
oh,
No, so my question, I guess, is for your statement. Is there a response that helps with this for this process?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all I know.
sorry.
No, you're good, you're good.
So, thank you. I think it's helpful to understand as a council, do we think that overnight camping is a use for our public spaces? Is that a yes or a no? I personally think like our public parks and our public spaces are not designed and shouldn't have overnight camping. Like regardless of the homeless topic, do we think our parks are designed for overnight camping? Is that an okay question to ask?
I think so, yeah. I think it's an okay question, and I'm really curious though. Well, I'm not curious because I want to outline some things I've heard just as we're like these are kind of where we're at. And so, based on what I'm hearing, I think it is a space where you follow the HRC's recommendation and use an informed data decision-making process and think about process matters, which I think I've heard before in previous meetings. And then also take this opportunity to utilize the recommendations from HRC in this context. And so I think there's kind of those are kind of where we're at in thinking the crisis.
I guess the one thing that I'm thinking is that like if we think these spaces are designed for overnight camping, not parking, camping, then we don't need to have this conversation. If we think they aren't, then we should probably be, then I think like the data, not that it's not relevant, it's important to have more information, it's fine, but as far as having an ordinance, then that makes sense to move forward. It's kind of how I look at it. And again, I'm not saying I'm right, that's just a thought I'm having, is like, there is a homelessness conversation because of the impacts of what this decision means, but if we all think that overnight camping is like how these spaces should be used, then we don't need to have this conversation. Then we don't want this ordinance.
Anyway, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a interesting way to pose it. I'm trying to think of a good analogy, right? Like you have a piece of land, you can physically be on it. Do we think it should be used for that purpose?
I mean, we have, well, can I say one thing really quick? Sorry, I keep interrupting.
That's something.
Well, I was just gonna continue with it, just because it's like, am I gonna recommend people pitch a tent somewhere? No, right? That's not what I'm thinking when it comes to this conversation. So I feel like I just don't think that the way that it's posed, like, do we think public spaces should be used for camping or are able to be camped on? To me, I think it's kind of, I don't know, I just don't think it's that binary. But I'm inclined to say yes, like I can literally use it for that purpose. But at the same time, like if someone's rollerblading down County Road, every day, it's like you would want to have a conversation with them instead of, giving them a misdemeanor or whatever. Like that's not the best analogy, but like for their own safety, right? Like, and I feel like leading with that. And again, maybe what I'm really trying to get at is there was a sliver from the mayor saying about the committee. Councilor Parisian also recommended that. I really think we should focus on kind of the consensus that we're starting to form part of that, maybe the only part of that, is like getting more information from a group of folks that are not us. And like that's what I think we should lean on going forward instead of like, again, I appreciate the sentiment. Like, I do think it's an important like way to frame it and to think about it, but I just don't think it captures the whole picture. And but yeah, so I don't think I can like fully answer your question, but I mean, yeah, I mean it's a piece of land and you can camp on it. You're physically able to do that. Should you be doing that out of your own safety? No. Should we be criminalizing that behavior? I don't think we should. So, yeah, but anyway, I just want to stick to that point. Like, let's get to the groups of people together. Let's talk to the county. Let's get people that aren't on the system to talk about this, because that's what I feel like the common thread is with the group at this very moment.
That's,
Sure, that's good.
yeah, I was, I'll echo those, yeah, I'll echo those sentiments too. I was like, there's a lot of agreement in general, and I don't think that it is directly how you think about the land and how it shows up in places go to for anybody. And I think even in this conversation, we think about the land out and what that means for our community as well too. There's something, yeah, there's levels to it. So I do think that, based on what your observation was, as well too, I think there is a great yeah, that's the villain. And I feel like that's where the conversation is. And I think that is, I mean, so you feel good about that recommendation moving forward, bring in some people in the county. I think it's up to us to kind of decide who we name in that space to go to the school brought in. And so, yeah, I think we spend some time what that looks like and how we should do that. Because that's up to the direction we can give you.
So should we give action to him now, like who those entities are, or if we need to go back to another work session to have him more swirl? Should think this should be, or we leave it in his hands?
Yeah. Good question.
I propose I cast a wide net
Yeah.
and flood you with all the information I can.
That sounds lovely. I was just hitting that. I was
If we want to chat, I mean, I want to be sure if there are specific data, right, very broad for anybody that's looking for something. I've got constant hours here that if there are things that can buy it, we can make some long conversations. But I guess what I'll take direction is I'll cast a wide net. We'll compile a lot of information. It takes a little bit of time to do so, but bring that back here to a point work session. If there's specific things in the meantime, please don't decide.
Can I ask one question off of this is for us as well? Typically, it's a process that we would read. I guess what would be the natural progression of process for that? There was some questions around like how we think about that or your rocks are. Well, too, like how does it develop and how do we make that clear and this is the process. That's a good question.
Yeah, council will recall when their first meeting, they get this handy dandy sheet. Depending on if it's code, just simply code ordinance, or if it's a land use issue, when your public hearing is affected by that. Sometimes it's the first reading, sometimes the second. You as a council can, request public feedback certainly at any given time. So if it's a traditional work session, first reading, second reading, for non-land use, the publication we're required to give is no later than 10 days following the first reading. Oftentimes for non-controversial ordinance updates, the second reading just goes on consent. For land use, we're required to have a public hearing at that first reading. So it's publicized ahead of time, and then the second reading, depending on how that discussion goes, it falls on whole business or consent.
Yeah, thank you. That's just a reminder for all of us. And that's, I appreciate it. Thank you all. Do we feel they go over?
Yeah.
All right, moving on to item D,